97. Season 1 has wrapped up. If you've not seen it, what are you still doing here? Go watch it. Come back. We'll watch it. We'll wait. Welcome back. This is I Have No Title, Not Much Podcast, the show where we talk about any and all aspects of pop culture. We are your hosts, Tyler
and Chris.
And again, we're talking about X-Men 97. When we first talked about it, only the first 2 episodes have launched. But now, season 1's wrapped up. And have we both watched it twice now? Or
I haven't watched the whole thing all the way through twice, but I at least went back and watched every episode out of order more than once. So
I think I've finished all but the last half of the finale twice now. So yeah, definitely, if you've not seen it, why not?
Yeah, that's one thing that I was startled and shocked to hear, is that a lot of people, it's gotten low viewership, not ratings, but viewership. The actual scores, ratings, are through the roof. One thing everybody can agree on is, this is good.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people are saying that the rest of Marvel and MCU needs to start taking lessons from what they're doing with this.
Yeah, the rare went woke, got rich, bitch! Yeah, we both hate that word.
Yeah.
And it's not coming back. We're not getting it back. It's done. It's only going to be used hyperbolically and, against people. You can't use that unironically now, so... Oh well, farewell. You lasted 100 years.
But for real, I didn't know how they were going to handle this going in, but just the writing, character work was just perfect. It had me hooked. Again, watched it twice already.
Yeah, the creative team, there's also a little documentary that they put up on Disney, which I don't know when that came out, but I just saw that it was on the front page this morning. I clicked on it, and they talk a lot about the original series, and probably more about the original series and getting that off the ground. I think Avi Arad's in it a bit, and a lot of the same creative team is involved in the new show too, so it's hard to talk about one without talking about the other, as it's a direct continuation, although there's a few minor retcons, some things that kind of left up in the air, but
which, with the continuity issues of the old one, kind of needed to get it to move in a singular direction.
To some degree, yes. This is one of the only things that bothers me in the context of the show. I'll get this out of the way, and then we can do the rundown. And this actually leads into how this show flows, and some of it still remains, is through and I can't remember if I mentioned this the last time we talked about it, through the original run of the show, the 92, Magneto is originally depicted as a villain, your kind of textbook comic book, why don't you understand what I'm trying to do here? You're traitors to your own cause. And then after his second appearance, they start just building him as either a neutral character or an anti-hero, one of the two, every time. But every time, they're oh no, what's he doing this time? Saving mutants and giving them a safe haven to not be persecuted? Oh, Magneto, how could you? And then they'll be the Phalanx is turning everybody in the world into a robot or whatever was that. Don't even know. I know it was probably clear in the episode, but trying to explain that on air would be difficult at best. So, the Phalanx. Anyway. Then they were I think Beast has to team up with Mr. Sinister of all people. And then they're yeah, pretty much the only person who can save us is Magneto. And then he's just depressed because they destroyed Asteroid M or whatever, and his plan to save mutant kind failed, or give them their own kind of space to not be persecuted. And so he helps them because he's, one of the most powerful things. And then they do depict him in the end he's sided with Apocalypse, and he's trick bitch, I was double agent just trying to figure out what you were up to. I was always on my own side, which is, just me. That was it. But every time they mention him, they're our greatest adversary. What, from 5 years ago? That one time he was gonna get some missiles? That was it. He broke into the UN and was guess what? I'm giving mutants a safe space. Now I know you hate that, and you hate me for doing it, but I'm doing it. And they're oh, how could he? Every time. And in this, it's the same way. They did all that character building, and in this, they're still like, this is a mistake. And right up until the final episode, they're still acting like this is all Magneto's fault. He just saved every mutant on the planet from the Omega Sentinels. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but right there at the end, they're still acting like this is all Magneto's. How the is this Magneto's fault at all? He saved everybody. Genosha was not his fault.
Yeah.
That was the other guy. And B, also the other guy, the Omega Sentinels, not on him. In fact, they should thank him. And Morph is the only one who is like, he saved us. So, whatever. And then the professor's like, don't do more bad things. What's the one bad thing he did? I know. It had, and this is with the genius structuring of the show. Some of that dialogue, it makes me mad. But everything else, pitch perfect. And the structuring of the show, there's only one other tiny flaw that I can see, but I understand why they didn't do it. We can get into that later. But we talked about the first 2 episodes, which reintroduction for anybody that doesn't know. The X-Men are here. Sentinels are like kind of the biggest overarching threat because it's just the one thing that threatens, is like the most realistic threat. Not a giant robot, but the idea that people would be cataloged and rounded up. Yeah. Which is a real thing that has happened historically time and again and will happen again. Just wait for it. Then that's a big cliffhanger ending with Magneto, inheriting. And I think I left off our previous discussion by saying, is the professor, has he died? Obviously we know he hasn't, and we knew he hadn't then too. They were just wanting to make it ambiguous. And then, Magneto is now the leader of the X-Men, which is a huge storyline in the 80s for I think it was 200 issues. He was just straight good guy grappling with his past and trying to reform by the genius writing of Chris Claremont. And we go from there. Then they get into the Madeline Pryor being a clone of Jean Grey storyline, Inferno.
Yeah.
They didn't call it Inferno, but
I like that. Mr. Sinister has always been one of my favorite villains, just aesthetically different.
He looks so interesting. It's like he doesn't have a cape. What is that?
It's like he doesn't have a cape, but he does have a cape.
Yeah, it's like is it metal? What's going on with his thing?
I don't know.
It's always looked so cool to me. I loved that action figure when I was a kid.
Yeah, Mr. Sinister, it seems almost kind of like the sonic screwdriver. It's like, what is his powers? Kind of whatever we need it to be.
It's so ill-defined. Whatever he does is well, he's doing this now. I'm still not clear on what it is, and I don't know if Wikipedia could easily explain it.
It doesn't, because it's like, oh, he's a mutant. Okay, well, what's his mutant power? Well, he also stole a bunch of mutant DNA to enhance himself, so
whatever he wants on the day.
Pretty much. But yeah, I learned how difficult and confusing this can be, because during my rewatch, Sarah kind of came in and out, and I was having to explain to her.
And who's Sarah?
My wife.
Okay.
And so she's having to...
Have I met her?
I think so.
Okay.
But...
So she doesn't have any base knowledge.
No.
I thought you were going to say several times. So she doesn't have any base knowledge of the X-Men. She hasn't watched the original series.
She knows a handful of characters.
Yeah, maybe seen some of the movies or something.
But so I'm having to explain, oh, who's this guy? Well, what is that guy? What is that guy doing? Wait, isn't that one guy? So trying to explain Sinister's powers and who he is to her, and then getting into Bastion of how, oh, he's human, but a mutant, but he hates the mutants. But he's also kind of a sentinel, but he's not a robot.
Yeah, I actually really liked how, because I knew they weren't going to do the comic storyline, they were going to have to do something original, and that was actually really good. And that they tied it back to the episode from the original series when there was an aborted timeline, an Age of Apocalypse style timeline where Bishop gets Wolverine and Storm to come back and save the professor, only it wasn't Legion who killed him this time. It was Fitzroy or no, I watched this a few weeks ago, but
one of those guys.
Again, it's like the guy with the green mohawk and doesn't wear a shirt. Why do so many comic book characters not wear shirts? I guess if I was that ripped, I might consider walking around like that, but I still don't think so. Whatever. Anyway, I'm glad Superman doesn't do that.
It was a weird time in the 90s.
Yeah, it was the 90s. It was a different time.
Super muscular and hairy. It seemed to be the trend.
So, Magneto, being my favorite character, I'm going to touch on Magneto a lot. I am, of course, wearing my Magneto was right shirt, because, obviously. And he got one of his best, like, alliterated one-liners when referring to the Goblin Queen. He called her a brimstone clone.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the show has just the perfect right amount of camp to it and cheese, and I love those moments. It doesn't have to. This show never made fun of itself. It just owns itself and does a better version of what it originally was. And that's something you were talking about. Marvel as a whole, the MCU, the cinematic universe, needs to pay attention to this and learn from it. They need to stop making fun of themselves. They made fun of themselves a lot in the Doctor Strange and the last Spider-Man movie. It's like making fun of Doc Ock's name, like, in real time. Whereas, like, when Sam Raimi originally had a joke about Doc Ock's name, it was J. Jonah Jameson, and it felt like he was like, this is funny, because it's like, what are the odds?
There's nothing wrong with having comedic elements in there, and sometimes needed, kind of break it up. Even Star Wars, like, you have these dark storylines and you got C-3PO and R2-D2 doing their thing, but it needs to be balanced, because if you get too self-referential, it's like you're just making a parody of yourself.
And I think with what the MCU has, the way they've used humor for certain things, it feels almost like they're making fun of comic books in general, and in turn comic book fans, whereas, like, that's what we're here for, right? Just let it be. Like, have humor in other ways. Like, the first phase of the MCU did a really good job of that. And I feel like later on it kind of devolves into, this is all kind of ridiculous, right? We should make fun of it, right? I don't think so.
That just seems to be what happens with the studios. It's like, oh, this one thing worked.
Yeah.
Then they lean too heavily in.
Yeah.
Because it seems like after Guardians of the Galaxy came out, they started leaning way more into the jokes.
Yeah. Whereas they learned the wrong lesson from that.
Yeah.
James Gunn knows how to write humor, and he knows how to make the best use of the actors / characters that he has them in place for. And it's not making fun of comic book culture or that in general or the genre. It's just being funny in a moment, which could work in any movie, any franchise, any genre, as long as it's funny. Whereas then they go on to make fun of the situation we're in, or what, you know. Whereas, like, you can touch on that, you know, like, this is pretty crazy, right? This is the world we live in, where it's like, this is the era where they go from people being conspiracy theorists about aliens to, we're literally working with a talking raccoon from another planet. So everything's on the table. And, like, saying, you know, like, having this impact you and saying, like, this would be something that would really change your worldview or your universe view. Referencing that, I think, is different than saying, like, so wait a minute, your name is Dr. Otto Octavius? Yes. And you decided to go by Dr. Octopus? Oh my... It drives me nuts when they, like, really double down on that. Like, Spider-Man making jokes, I don't have a problem with it. But non-stop, like, making fun of the comic book source material does bother me a bit. So anyway.
It's like the difference between a Mel Brooks spoof movie and modern spoof movie. Yeah.
That's night and day. There's not even a comparison.
Instead of it being like a reverential jabbing, it's the lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah, and his were also intelligently written with like good actors, mostly himself. Anyway, so they do the storyline where there's two Jeans. It's Madeline Pryor. In the comic books, this went on for what felt like an eternity, and they got through it in like 20 minutes.
Yeah, because didn't they like bring in like the Hellfire Club and all that?
Yeah, like Jean was presumed dead for a long time, and in the comic they didn't know. They knew that this wasn't Jean. This was just Madeline Pryor, and they were like, it's weird that she looks like Jean Grey, and it's weird that Cyclops has such a type that he's going out with her. Should somebody tell Scott, like, this is weird, like, we're worried about you, like, that's not Jean, like, come on, man. And then Wolverine's like, he likes redheads, what's the big deal? Like, leave him alone. And also, if Jean comes back, dibs. So eventually Jean comes back, and it's revealed Madeline was a clone, and it's not as complicated as Spider-Man's clone saga, but it's complicated. So this one wraps it up in a nice, neat bow. Super fast. But I kind of like that they did that and not spent too much time on it, because they added in the plot thread and element just enough so that it can be referenced in Jean's story a lot, and we, even as the viewer, will never really... I mean, unless they do reveal it, they might, like when they were switched out or whatever, as Sinister had her at several points, and even could have had her at other points off screen that we did not see in the original series. So we don't know how long she was not even Jean. This is the one where they have the baby and it's infected with the techno virus, and then they have to send it to the future in the end, right? And Cyclops said, there's a lot of memes, people making fun of Cyclops saying, "I've abandoned my child! I've abandoned my boy!" And like, what are you supposed to do? He was in a no-win situation. Like, the kid's gonna die of this mutant virus that only a mutant can get, and then the only way to save him is to send him to the future. But they can't go with him. So what they're supposed to let him die? It's just catch-22. You gotta send him and hope that everything works out. It does and it doesn't. So
have you seen the meme that's like, there's only 10 plots in X-Men and 5 of them are like how to ruin Scott Summers' day?
Yes. I love that whoever wrote that focused on that, because in reality, and I commented on one of them one time, I said something about like, except there should be 10 more that it's just like Wolverine has a thing that happens to him or has something from his past, which I think was one of them. But I'm like, that's most of them. Or something from Wolverine's past comes back to ruin Cyclops' day. Given that, because I have always felt Wolverine's overused. I think I can see why people like him. I do. I'm not oblivious to that. I just think, especially growing up in the 80s, like, yeah, he's cool, but he's kind of shoved down everybody's throats. Like, oh man, isn't this guy cool? He's got claws, and he's like kind of a redneck. It'd be like if Stone Cold Steve Austin were 5'3" and had claws that came out from in between his knuckles. That'd be Wolverine. And it just like, I had a few action figures here for sure. It's cool. Like I had the one that had the spring-loaded.
Oh yeah, I had several of those.
Awesome, you know? I didn't trump my Cyclops with where you press the button on the lever on the back. Yeah, that one, the blue and white. And it lit up. And that thing worked for years. I don't know how it didn't get corroded on the inside, but whatever. Anyway, this show actually uses Wolverine extremely well. I know people are going to be mad by sidelining him. And this is when people also say, like, Anakin, like, there shouldn't be another Darth Vader thing or a thing exploring Anakin because the entire saga was about him. Guess what? Like, 12 of the 13 X-Men movies are basically Wolverine movies. And I know that's not connected to this. He's had so many comic books all his own, and then storylines devoted just to him inside the ensemble cast of the X-Men comic books. It's okay. It'll be okay. If you're like the Wolverine fan, you're gonna get more stuff, I promise you. In fact, I think somebody just made him even more dangerous going into the future, so we'll get to that. Motendo?
That was a kind of a weird episode. I'm trying to figure out where they were going with that.
I hated Jubilee when I was a kid, right? And my girlfriend hates her now. The thing that she doesn't realize is, aside from how Jubilee dresses, my girlfriend is Jubilee. And here's the thing, by the end of the show, take away the yellow jacket, make that jacket black too. There she is, right there. So, and I even think like the powers, it's like dangerous but kind of ridiculous on its face. If my girlfriend had a mutant power, I think it would be this. Loves sparklers, says she doesn't like the 4th of July, likes the 4th of July. Anyway, enough of that. I'll see if she actually listened to this when she comes like stomping down the stairs one day next week. I hate Mojo though, for real. I don't know what it is. I know why they wrote this. It's meant to be kind of, or the person who created it.
It's the fastest way to introduce Jubilee as the senior and Roberto as the incomer.
Yes, and you know, a little behind the scenes, the original actress, they tried to get as much of the original cast back as possible. Some of the roles were reversed, and some of the people could not come back either from death or I know we couldn't resurrect them. I worded that strangely. But the original Jubilee said it's a white woman. She said I would just feel more comfortable if they had a Chinese actress since Jubilee is of Chinese descent, and so they did. And I can't tell the difference. The new woman does, I think, a perfect job. But they did a cool thing in this where there was going to be like an older version of Jubilee, and they got the original actress to play that version. So it was cool that they got like this, you know, like as much of a full reunion as possible in there. All the 8-bit, or not 8-bit, everybody kept saying 8-bit. It's either like
16.
It's 16-bit referencing the original, like that big arcade game, which was based on Pride of the X-Men, the pilot that was predated this by a couple years. That was going to be the pilot to the series. Then they jumped forward and really brought it in. That felt really 80s, and just a few years difference. They made this one extremely 90s. It was, you know, Magneto is like the main boss and felt like cartoonishly over the top villain, which maybe some foreshadowing there from what they were going to do, although not the same thing. And I don't know, like it was really cool to see all of that, at least the visuals. That was half the story. For any 90s kid who just wanted to have their birthday, go out to the mall, play video games, and then you get stuck inside a video game. I'm glad that they did it as like a half story.
Yeah.
But then we get into the life-death storyline where Storm begins her love affair with Forge, and they have a really complicated relationship, and there's this mystical evil owl entity. Bruh, I don't know what's going on with that owl. I don't like him.
The adversary.
And it was like Storm standing in her own way, like having mental blocks. Not akin to Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2. Was that Spider-Man 2? Yeah, I think so. The original Spider-Man 2. Where Forge put her in a machine to get her powers back after she'd lost her powers from a machine that he also created.
Helped create,
actually. It worked, as it happens, but it's like she still can't get past her own mental blocks, like thinking about what it would be like to be human.
How did it make her hair grow and costume change, though?
She is an Omega level threat, so
costume change and hair growth is a secondary mutation.
One that we're all just going to have to be okay with, like this stylistic montage of I actually really liked the mohawk. I don't like all these people complaining about these stupid things. Like, I don't understand that. Like, how is that one of the things that you'd complain about? Like, she's not feminine enough? I don't know. Have you not seen her attributes other than her hair? That was kind of dumb. But to get in that from the it would have been cool if they actually had some of her costume from the 80s that was like kind of tank top and black leather pants. But they go back to her original costume from 1975.
Yeah.
So, and then by the end of the series, well, we'll get to that. Motendo, Life Death, Part 1. And then that brings us to episode 5.
The gut punch episode. Oh.
Remember it. And if any of you feel like we took too long talking about Motendo, I'm sorry, because this one was going to be a hard one to talk about. And then there's 5 more episodes. So it's like this, it's the longest episode, I think. No, it's actually not. The last episode
I was going to say, the last episode was like 40-some minutes.
I forgot that was the case.
It
was the longest up to that point, though. And not even by that much, but there's so much crammed into this. And it is like Ace of Base? Yeah. Ace of Base playing during the mutant ball? Like, it doesn't get more 90s than this.
If you've still not seen the show yet and you're still here, stop the video, go watch it. Just seriously. Be prepared. This is one of the most emotional gut punch episodes, and then come back.
Yeah, if you've not watched, if you're really just hanging out, if you intend to completely not watch this show, you're just against it and you're just listening to us because you've been driven mad by some, I don't know what could do that to you, but
some like evil owl demon.
Yeah. So this is where the show gets fucking real. They get invited. Well, so it starts with they're doing an interview. It's like an expose on the X-Men because they're kind of public figures. Professor X was a public
because
figure.
Genosha is going to be inducted into the UN.
Yeah. So Trish Tilby, who is a longtime character in the comics. She was Beast's girlfriend. That's why there's a lot of flirtation between the two of them that they're hinting at. She comes to interview them, and she interviews them one by one. And eventually, she gets to Cyclops, who almost loses it. And yes, I said almost. That wasn't losing it. That was him being straight the up. A doctor refused to deliver his baby. What? Okay. So he has to go hard and be like, we put our lives on the line for you. And thank God that we do, and that we're not vengeful, because otherwise, where would we all be? So I have to get treated like this on a personal level, but guess what? I still have my uniform in the back and I'm ready to suit up. Back on Genosha, only Gambit, Rogue, and Magneto go. It was only going to be Magneto and Rogue, but Gambit decided to go. And this is, I think, an interesting character study on Gambit. They put it all on the line for Gambit, but in such subtle ways, and this actually goes into the beauty of the writing on this. Thank you, Bo DeMeo, and everyone on the creative team. What the professor's last words to him from the original finale were, and I'm paraphrasing because I didn't write it down, how many times must the scoundrel prove himself a hero before he believes it himself? And anybody who has seen this and knows where this is going to go, that is so impactful now. It's such a great callback that they don't reference it in the show. But for anybody that does think the show is too woke, I think the depiction of Gambit dispels that. A lot of things that want to go too hard in that direction, and I mean too hard, that are heavy-handed with a message, you will see things wanting to vilify men more in a toxic way, showing toxic masculinity, which is a real thing. And in this, they show Gambit, who you would think of anybody like Gambit or Wolverine being like potentially the most toxic people. I'm saying potentially, not in actuality, but I'm saying potentially. On their way there, Magneto refers to him as, or once they get there, Magneto refers to him as being like adolescent, his passive adolescent, something. But he shows the most maturity out of any character in this whole episode. There's like Jean and Scott having like a weird kind of fight because of him having still feelings for this clone of her that he was in love with and had the baby with. That is not in dispute. She is the one who had the child, and they have all these complicated feelings, but like Jean somehow forgets to mention that she was out there snogging Wolverine in the lake.
Yeah.
And so there's, Wolverine's cool about it. It was like, no, this isn't right. Which was great too. And Cyclops almost loses it on air, on TV. And when Rogue goes to tell Gambit like her whole past story, her whole past history, and that she's most likely going to be taking, her side, Magneto's side, not taking his side, but taking her place at his side as the Queen of Genosha, leading mutant kind, which kind of is, she had already entered into a relationship with him, but it was probably unspoken too. So this would have made things more official, and she just needed to, even though hers and Gambit's relationship was always non-existent, unofficial, call it what you will, she said she had to have this, she had to just be honest with him because it's the right thing to do. And he takes it with such grace and maturity. Yes, they have a few sharp words afterward, but I mean, don't expect him to not be mad about it. But even in that, he's like, okay, then from here on, we can still be friends. That was amazing. And I don't think enough people, some people have. If you're listening to this and you caught it, you've even posted about it, isn't that great? I thought it was wonderful, this depiction, because they could have gone in the wrong direction and left them in a bad place. They could have had him walk out, could have had him be mad, and then when they have to team up in the end, it could have been a more tense moment that they're reunited to fight once again. But they don't even do that. It doesn't need to be like that. It can be, okay, from here on, mon ami, and which is what he refers to as everybody else, my friend. And she, dances, like flight dances to Ace of Base up in with Magneto, and because of his, like however it works that he can touch her, like neutralizing her power with this static bubble that, keeps her from ever really touching him.
Actually, in the comic books, couldn't Gambit partially do some of that too, where he manipulates kinetic energy?
I think that came later, and even much later, like more, I think I want to say into the 2010s, like closer to around 2010 era, when they retitled one of the volumes X-Men Legacy. I can't remember what year, but they evolved Rogue's powers to the point where she had total control of them, and she could absorb people's powers without harming them. There was one really cool moment where she had a bunch of younger mutants with her, and she was leading a team, and they're facing, I can't remember what they're fighting, but it was something bad. She rolls up her sleeves and just has all of them grab a part of her arm, and she turns into this, like, monstrous thing, and just goes to town on whatever. I wish I could remember what issue that was. But it was really cool. If you, like, I'm sure you could find that image just on Google. Pretty cool shot showing, like, how powerful she could be once she masters this. I hope they eventually take her into that territory here. That's the other great thing about this show in general, is that they're blending stories that are like 30 years apart. You know, we have E is for Extinction from around 2000, 2001, written by Grant Morrison, and storylines that are taking place from like 1982, 84, 85 from Chris Claremont. Also with the look of what they looked like in 1991, 92, for also some of which written by Chris Claremont. He was on the book for a long time. So, Gambit's still not happy about stuff, but again, who would be? He takes it pretty well, though. It's not like anything else we've really seen in a long time. Maybe if ever. And then...
But how cool was it to see Gambit go beast mode when the Super Master Mold starts blowing everything up?
Amazing. So after Ace of Base, which also, if you go back and watch when Jean has her like vision of the future with all the rats and the like Terminator 2 vision of Holocaust or something, like Judgment Day, there's this song that's kind of playing in the background. It sounds like slightly reversed and distorted, and that's the Ace of Base song that they were foreshadowing, Happy Nation. So everything's cool, and I was like, this is kind of a weird episode. And then it goes hard. Cable shows up, and I was like, oh no, this is whenever Cable shows up, Cable's like the Mothman. If Cable shows up, something terrible is about to happen. And then he gets like snatched away by his own time travel technology, which I thought was really weird. Is explained later, but you can see explosions happening in the background that are not fireworks but are on the ground. And I saw that and I was like, oh no, how bad is this gonna get? And my only fear is that they're gonna kill Magneto, of course, because they've done that dozens of times in the comics. Most recently they did one.
And at that point, Magneto was presumed dead.
Yeah. After what happens. So an explosion happens. One of the most this was like Akira level real. Like this goes almost full anime in some of the fight scenes. The choreography is amazing. Going to this fight, these Sentinels, and I remember and Nightcrawler coming in to like save Rogue and Magneto with that slow motion bamf. That was awesome. That scared me too because I was like, not Nightcrawler. Do not kill Nightcrawler. After that, Gambit comes back up and Magneto asks how many, but neither of them specify. They know, I think they've seen enough to know it's Sentinels, and Nightcrawler just says too many. But which one are they referring to? How many people have died so far, or how many Sentinels do we have to fight? And it's really both. Yeah. Too many got killed already, and there's too many Sentinels.
Yeah, when Nightcrawler got hit, and I thought they were going to kill him off, I'm like, no. And then Gambit jumps up and gets stabbed through the chest. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, I was like, okay, so he can survive. Nope, he's not gonna. He's gonna blow up this thing.
See how powerful Gambit is by fully charging a Master Mold Sentinel and detonating it?
Yeah, pretty wild. And of course, I didn't know if Magneto was going to be able to also have saved those people where that wasn't made clear at first. I was like, okay, they're not gonna have him be dead. Where are they gonna go with him after that? And is it gonna be just him, or will he have saved the few people? Because if he wasn't able to save them, he's gonna be furious. And they show images of the Holocaust that took place in Germany. They some of those images there you can see for a split second. There's a little boy with the Star of David on his arm. That's him. So yeah, that episode ends like that, left me devastated for 7 days.
Because Gambit is my favorite X-Men. And
he's one of my favorites. I've had multiple action figures of him over the years. That was a gut punch.
Like, to the point that later that week, Chris actually texts me, no context, just says, "How you doing?"
It was a rough week. And I mean, like, of the X-Men, my two favorites on any X-Men team were generally, like, if Magneto's not on there, depends on who's on the team, but Gambit was always one of the cooler ones, you know. And I do love Cyclops too. Somebody has to be the responsible one. I also just like, generally, it's not necessarily even like the smartest member on the team. It's usually the strategist. I don't know why that appeals to me. But the next week, the more I thought about where this was going to go, I was like, we're not going to get back to it. They're going to do the thing they do. When something like that happens, they make you sit with it longer by going in a different direction with the story. And I was like, I wasn't expecting Professor X. I was expecting Professor X to come back later in the season. And I thought it would be more dramatic. Like, we're not going to have any context. He's just going to come back and whoop ass. But we get more of Storm's story. And it's kind of set during the events of what's happening in Genosha. Maybe the same day or a day or two prior leading up to it. Because at the end of her storyline where she gets her powers back, which, yes, is really cool, but is kind of obligatory. She lost her powers. She's one of their best characters. So it's really cool to have this kind of story where she's off by herself, separated from the rest of the group. I know a lot of people didn't like that she wasn't one of the mainline characters in the story, but this is an ensemble. I mean, is Morph anybody's favorite? If he is, he doesn't get a lot of screen time. I know Wolverine's a lot of people's favorite. He didn't get much at all. It's a round robin, and I think this is better written than the original show.
Yeah, it's still a good story arc for Storm, even if she doesn't get to be.
Yeah, and that's the thing, too, is she got her own personal story arc. She's the only one who got, like, portions of multiple episodes devoted, like, just to her and Forge, of course. Forge showing, like, I think for some reason, a lot of people got mad that, like, he also has mystical abilities that he has learned. Or, I mean, I guess learned is a good way to look at it. Like, Doctor Strange didn't have it naturally. He had to actually, he may have had an aptitude for it, but he had to train and learn. So, like, that's from the comics.
Even Ford said, picked a little bit up from my mother. I'm not that great.
Yeah, and he's, I think, was meant to be a shaman in his tribe. I do not remember if it's, I don't think it's Cherokee.
No, it was one of the Midwestern. I want to say Shawnee, maybe.
That may be. I can't
remember either.
So Professor comes back. It shows the Professor. He's gonna become like king of the galaxy or something.
The Emperor.
The Emperor of the which they're racist against him, and they're like, he's not even a regular human. He's like a lower caste. Which I'm like, how are the people who, same as everybody else, but they just have extra abilities? I mean, I know if you're like stuck looking like Leech, that could be, you know, like, this sucks. Or if you're the guy who has like 3 noses and that's your mutant power, that kind of sucks. You're just deformed. But if you're like the Professor and you can literally communicate telepathically and take control of people,
it just goes to show that the FOH propaganda works even across the galaxy.
Yes. Don't listen to those guys. And I've even heard some allies talking like the FOH. It sounded a little bit like the FOH when they're like, let's be careful how we talk about, you know, like the kind of ways that we talk about the X-Men here. I mean, mutants are dangerous. Whoa, hey! They also save your life, pal. So he's going to marry Lilandra, and this seemed to go on. I didn't mind it, but I never really liked the Shi'ar stuff. I know the X-Men have a long, rich history of going into space, and there's all these characters associated with Scott and Havoc's dad, who became a space pirate. I know that sounds weird. Comics are weird. Get into it. They're space pirates. And the Starjammers, that's what they're called. You can't make this stuff up unless you're Chris Claremont, and then you do it for a living. They did appear in the original cartoon a few times, and then there's all the Shi'ar stuff. There's the Brood, which I don't think have done in...
No, I don't think so.
Or a full story. I think they were like maybe shown or something, maybe on a Mojo thing where it was a simulation or something, but they didn't do a storyline with the Brood. I don't think.
Wasn't that like prime 90s territory too, though?
It would have been. It would have been, probably would have been on the slate for if they'd done a full season 5. But, next to last episode, Mr. Sinister's origin, whatever. Anyway, so the professor, they're racist against the professor, and he's like, damn it, I guess I gotta get, like, up everybody's brain and, like, put him in their place. And he gives a rousing dissertation on them being racist against him, and that, but it's really for all of us. Like, coexistence is messy, and that's why we all have to work harder. Lovely. And then he gets this, he has Obi-Wan Kenobi moment where he feels all these voices suddenly snuffed out, and then he sees Gambit. He doesn't see Gambit and Magneto, and that was first foreshadowing that Magneto wasn't really dead. Then we get another foreshadowing on the skull, Death's skull, on Gambit's face.
That's my my theory is that Apocalypse has done something, and Gambit's going to come back as Death of the Four Horsemen.
Yeah, which was a storyline they did in the comic. I think at some point, I think Wolverine was a Death Horseman.
Angel, Wolverine, and Gambit.
Yeah.
At some point, were all Death.
No matter how you feel about Archangel's various costumes, Gambit looked the coolest. Like, with, like, his hair white, and they turned his skin, like, dark gray. I can't wait to see what they do with that. Next episode, we finally get back to the aftermath of the situation. We get some cool cameos with Ross from, not from Friends,
Thunderbolt.
but Thunderbolt Ross, Hulk adversary. He's just a member of the government, like military. In the MCU, it's kind of, I think he's moved into the government from the military. I can't remember. In the new movie, he's going to be the president. I'm pretty sure Harrison Ford is going to play him, and he is going to be the president of the United States.
When are they going to bring him in as Red Hulk?
I think in the next Captain America. Rogue goes to find the people responsible for Genosha. Is it Magneto? No, it's not. It's the people who made the freaking Sentinels. So she goes and accosts him. Then she goes and talks to Captain America and embarrasses him privately. He is put in a really tense place by saying, we have to play this by the book. And she's like, well, you won't be needing this. And chucks his Frisbee. Then there's this really amazing moment, and that brings us back to what makes the X-Men so special. Why are the X-Men objectively better than the Avengers? Because when the Avengers are done, they go home. They go their separate ways. They're not all of them are really friends, and it's awkward, it's weird, and like, do they even care about each other? The X-Men are family, and this is something the show keeps repeating because it's important. Nightcrawler and Rogue's relationship, like, they're basically strangers, but when they realize they've been connected by and corrupted and so badly damaged by Mystique, who was Nightcrawler's blood mother
and Rogue's
father,
kind of something mother.
Yeah, this is kind of a stepmother, foster, like mentor, at least for a long time, depending. They know that there's this connection there, and they choose to treat each other as family. And because of Nightcrawler being just such a lovable character and so heartfelt, he goes all in on that. And the same with Rogue. It makes sense for these characters to do that. You couldn't see somebody like from New York being like, family, who gives but like, Rogue is this character from the South where family would mean so much, and she has, even her biological dad was abusive to her, so for her to yearn for family connection, that it makes sense for her to say, like, I have a brother now, and mean it. So when she is on a rampage and they find her, I think in Mexico, and it's, I think it's Jean that's talking to, kneels down and is talking to her, and she just finally breaks. And when she looks up, it's all of them there with her. It's not just one of them, it's all of them. It's your family. We're here with you. I don't think that any iteration of the Avengers could have a moment like that, where you look up and you think, like, you would turn and hug each one of them. Or, like, what's off air there is a group hug. Yeah. That is what's off air, and that's maybe even more 90s than Ace of Base. But they didn't do it, maybe rightly so.
Or like
but
the
headcanon.
Jump in the air, freeze
Jump
frame,
in the air,
high five.
Yeah. Yes, Pearl Jam for life. How did that episode end? They go around. Oh, that's when everything kicks off.
Yeah.
Because then it feels like it like falls into the finale, which is 3 parts.
Yeah.
Tolerance is extinction, but
Yeah, that's when we get like who the true villain is.
Yes.
And
Bastion's revealed. Oh yeah, and like Rogue almost kills Trask. I forgot they had that fight there in whatever city when they track him down, and she kind of drops him and is like,
he was going to jump anyway.
yeah, he's gonna jump in. I mean, that's what I also think that makes. Again, the X-Men are complicated. It's meant to be slightly controversial. It's meant to make you have these debates amongst yourself. Morph's like, is this who we are now? What, are we supposed to save this guy so we can, make more Sentinels? Better ones? I hope not.
Let's talk about Morph for a second.
Good idea.
So he is shown to have some abilities that I didn't think he had.
Yeah.
Because
the one that doesn't make sense the most is Quicksilver.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess you could kind of explain the Hulk and the Juggernaut transformations off a little bit.
But because he still gets housed like as the Juggernaut, those Sentinels just toss him around.
Yeah.
He gets his ass handed to him almost every time.
I know he can copy like physical attributes, even like weapons. Granted, they're not as durable as actual weapons, but he doesn't get their power.
Right.
But
no, like he could be Wolverine and the claws, but he wouldn't have his like healing factor,
yeah,
or the skeleton. It wouldn't be like real metal. It definitely wouldn't be adamantium, and he wouldn't have his like keen senses, like the smell.
So, because he did get a little bit stronger, presumably, when he turned into the Hulk in that one episode and was punching Sentinels. Same with Juggernaut, where he busts through the floor.
Right,
but
because he's like 8 foot tall, 4 foot thick person.
So, I mean, that's still kind of physical. You can make the argument that he is kind of stronger, just weird. But Quicksilver, when he transforms into Quicksilver, his super, that was like, I didn't think he could do that.
That seems a bit much. That's because Quicksilver accesses some sort of kinetic manipulation, which is how he is able to move so fast. They explain this in DC Comics a completely different way. It's almost like, I don't know what's up with that. We'll leave that alone. Quicksilver is a different thing. And then that opens up the debate to say like you would be big like the Hulk. He wouldn't be as unsustainably like endlessly strong like as the Hulk's. It depends. His strength, he only gets stronger and sometimes bigger based on how angry he is. For Morph, that wouldn't necessarily be the case because there are other characters that mimic other mutants' powers, like Hope Summers, and I don't think that that's what he's doing. Except when he did the thing with Quicksilver. Now, is it that... Okay, so just for a second and a slight aside... How did they get to Muir Island when they needed to go? And after the skipping forward just slightly into the Sentinel attack, the Prime Sentinel attack, they destroy the mansion, and then they have to get to Muir Island where they have a bunch of supplies and new costumes and new vehicles. Nightcrawler is going to bamf them there, but Nightcrawler's not that powerful. So here's what I have in my head to make this make sense. They're in New York, right? They all hold hands. He bamfs them 2 miles up in the air, and then 2 miles at a time, they're just leapfrogging through the air until they get to Scotland. Problem solved. Nightcrawler's not that powerful, especially when teleporting more than a few people. So are they gonna, was Morph going real fast, but not Quicksilver fast, maybe? Because then he has not been shown to replicate abilities like Magneto's manipulation of matter or Gambit's kinetic explosive abilities. They did show him being Mr. Fantastic, but again, that's like a physical manipulation of your body.
Yeah. He also transformed into Psylocke and Magic, but only used their swords.
Yes. And I felt like that solidifies it. Like he's just doing that because this is fun for him, and he just likes cameoing, I guess. Because Magic... overpowered.
Yeah.
That could end every fight right there. Just turn into Magic. She is a master teleporter that can take like a bunch of people wherever they want.
But as far as my thoughts of how they got to Muir Island is one, either Forge or part of them went with Forge. And the other part is Moira sent for them because they did say that with that technology, it would have been shielded.
Also, I think Moira's dead.
Well, no, didn't they mention her in the show? Or was...
I think she died on Genosha. Because I don't think they showed her on Muir Island.
No, I don't think they showed anyone else on Muir Island.
Yeah, it was once they got there, it was just them.
Nah.
And they did show Banshee getting killed. I think it was both of them. And Madeline.
I might have to go back and watch that. I missed that.
I think in the end they mention it, and I think maybe they mention it, somebody mentions it like off air. Because I think Bo DeMeo has been giving like updates and hints and things, and I think he confirmed certain deaths, and I think he said Moira was one of them. They did have the Emma Frost cameo when they were rescuing people and doing a search when she entered into her diamond form. That was she was one of the main characters that joined the X-Men after the Genosha storyline in the comics. She manifested her secondary mutation, which was to turn her skin diamond hard, or her body itself into a diamond, and join the X-Men. Now, she'd always been kind of like anti-hero, or for a long time anti-hero or neutral-ish kind of character, and had led a good guy team. So she's just kind of a bitch. Is her character. She's mean, and so they reveal Bastion. They reveal Cable comes back and has an EMP, so they can foreshadow how they can take care of these Prime Sentinels later. And Bastion and Mr. Sinister are working together, and Bastion is shaving Magneto like Reservoir Dog style. I don't know. It's weird. And I had so much speculation about this. Like, did he always intend for Magneto to escape? Or was he going to turn it? Because why wouldn't you turn him into some corruption of a Prime Sentinel or whatever and use him as your main weapon?
That's a good thought, and probably the direction he was going.
There's also, or unleash him, just like let him escape and do what he's gonna do, because then mutants would be seen as, an extinction level threat, and he's done your work for you. There's also some people have gone back and looked at some images, like where there's like the United Nations war room looking, where everybody's sitting around this huge round table. Bastion, the people think that the back of Bastion's head can be seen there. Now, this is when they're debating on letting Genosha in. So, it is speculated that it is at least implied he was involved in getting Genosha to be admitted to the United Nations so that he could mastermind this entire thing way back from the inception.
Well, they were talking about him pulling strings from the start, so maybe.
Now, we'll get to what I said was what I feel, not really a flaw in the show, but I feel like they missed a trick. The reason why I bring this up and say it's not really a flaw is because I understand why they did what they did instead. They did not want to show the professor at all. They did have Morph turn into him, which I thought was kind of a weird thing, and that maybe they shouldn't have done that. If they didn't want to show the professor at all for a long time, they shouldn't have even had Morph do that, so that it's more impactful later. But if they're okay with that, I think there should have been one scene as a cold open, and it would have been the professor going to a little boy's house to try and recruit him. You never see the little boy. Otherwise, his weird pinkish skin would have given it away later and spoil it. So you never see the little boy. You just see him talking to a woman, and we don't even have to completely see the woman. She could be in shadow. And you wouldn't necessarily recognize the voice because it would have been a younger woman, because this would have been 30, 40 years ago. And then they had this conversation. She freaks out on him. He has to leave. Well, this is the story of like at least half of every time the professor goes and talks to somebody's parents. Sometimes they're like, good, take them. I can't deal with it anymore. Sometimes they're like, wonderful, they're going to get the help they need. Sometimes he just has to lie and say they're going to a school for the gifted. But sometimes you get those bigoted people that are like, no, you're disgusting. My son's not that. Go away. Which is what happened. And that would have tied the whole season together in a nice bow, because I don't think they did enough to emphasize this. But one of the key points to beating Bastion was to appeal to his humanity, and that he believed that his mom asked the professor to take him, but he wouldn't because his mom lied to him. Whereas in truth, the professor went to come get him and she turned him down. I feel like that should have been shown somehow. And I think the best place to show it was from the beginning, so that by the end we'd be like, oh, that's what that was. It was Bastion he was going to see. Because who would have even figured that out? It would have been the best foreshadowing, because nobody would have been like, Bastion, because it's a complete retelling of his story from the comic. Nobody would have been like, Nimrod combining with Master Mold to make Bastion? The professor doesn't go to that guy's house. He didn't have a house. He wasn't ever a child. That doesn't make any sense. So it would have been hidden in plain sight. sight. And it would have tied the whole storyline up in a nice bow. And we would have gotten a nice moment with the professor at the beginning that shows what his daily life was like when he was trying to recruit or, search for mutants to bring them to the school to protect them. Going into this finale, Tolerance is Extinction, 3 parts, 1 title, 3 parts. This could almost be like a little mini movie going on here. We get them all except for Morph. Morph does get a new costume, but it's weird because it's like completely new, similar to what he wore in Age of Apocalypse. But the rest of them are in what they wore more or less in the Pride of the X-Men cartoon from the 80s with Kitty Pryde, except for the professor who's not wearing a turtleneck. He's back in his like cool military style jumpsuit. Or almost like an Air Force thing. What did you think?
I thought it was pretty cool. Especially we get to see why Magneto is always tiptoed around as such a huge force by completely disrupting the Earth's magnetic field.
Yes. Also, Nightcrawler, when it got into that scene where he's fighting back to back with Wolverine.
Like 3 swords, yes.
Yes. And then Allison was like, they gave him a tail sword? I'm like, of course they gave him a tail sword. They better have given him a tail sword. So Magneto saves every mutant on the planet's bacon because they were losing. I don't know if anybody noticed that. Mansion's destroyed. They're totally wrecking. I mean, like, Morph turns into the Juggernaut. Does not do a thing. They wreck the mansion. Wolverine and Nightcrawler, like, destroy several of them. And then they start putting themselves back together. And also, like, so those were real people that they just dismembered entirely. But they can maybe be saved? That's really up. Yeah. What kind of technology is in them that you could just reconstruct the person, and then if you can get that stuff out of them, they're just going to be okay?
Well, actually, Beast doesn't say that they're going to take the technology out. Just kind of flip a switch and turn the humanity back on.
So he's permanently altered those people.
Yeah.
Super up. Professor comes back. Magneto unleashes his worldwide EMP, which I was like, and then Wolverine says he's declared war on the planet. Did you notice you were losing and that you guys were like almost done? So Tolerance is Extinction Part 3. They're so good. There's a lot of like minor things, and there's such great. I'll have to go through. And then next episode, I'm just gonna have one-liners, like all these moments,
all little cameo nods and stuff.
Yes. Like there, so many in that. So one thing I wasn't expecting is Magneto to just show up on their doorstep on the lake or whatever, and he's not. He doesn't even have like. It's like, Professor, you came back. You were off somewhere. This happens. He's not even like surprised to see him. It's like, oh, look what the cat dragged in. Now that the world's. Thanks for showing up. I did what you wanted me to, by the way, which was setting me up for failure. Thanks for that. And just, has this asteroid with all this like Aurora Borealis. Also, anybody concerned that Magneto lets off a geomagnetic storm, and then the following week, you can we have one where you can see an Aurora Borealis as far south as Alabama? Is that nobody's freaked out by that? Okay, whatever. So Storm is reunited with the X-Men. So, they lose one Omega level mutant and they gain one back. I guess has to be in balance. Magneto comes down and makes an offer and says, I'm just going to start things over on Asteroid M and we'll see what happens. Did you see what they unleashed on us? Prime Sentinels, and also they killed Leech in front of me. That was enough to like push him over the edge again, which again is the first time that he's done anything like on this even level at all since like the first few episodes of season 1. Just remember that people like to think of Magneto as like the same as Apocalypse or something, like evil incarnate, because that's what in like, I don't even know, the other cartoons maybe that are less nuanced, probably X-Men Evolution. I never finished Wolverine and the X-Men.
Don't worry, they didn't finish Wolverine and the X-Men either.
Yeah, it was just, one season, and it left a bunch of cliffhangers or unfinished storylines.
Yeah, from what I understand, it was originally on Nickelodeon, I think is the one that had it. They did their first season, then it kind of left on a huge cliffhanger of either the Phoenix coming or Jean being dead or something, and then Disney acquired Marvel, and they just shut it down instead of bringing it over and picking it.
Well, that sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they have to go to really, I guess, reason with Magneto to get him to reverse the EMP to turn the electricity back on in the world. It's not fully explained, but, comic book logic. We'll deal with it.
That he could reverse what he did and restore the magnetic poles, but that's not going to like unfry everything.
That too. And if you look at the real world ramifications of it, like every plane that was in the air, down.
Well, they did kind of mention that a lot of people died.
Yeah,
so.
They did. And they didn't mention how, but maybe from the Prime Sentinel attacks, he was kind of left with one alternative. Now, he could have turned it right back on after that, but having done that also, I think, turns back on either the Prime Sentinels or just the regular Sentinels, giving Bastion more leeway to do whatever else.
I think it turned back on the Prime because Bastion was directly controlling the Sentinels.
And he had some regular ones on whatever island it was he was on, so... we get Blue Team, Gold Team, what they had in the 90s when they had two titles going on. Not exactly divvied up the same way that they would have been. And some people have also already pointed out that in the original cartoon, they really didn't do Jean much justice. She was always fainting, she was always yelling in pain, always dying. And something that was really missing, of course they got the Wolverine love triangle in there, but she is best friends with Storm. And that is something they got just right in this show, depicting them as close as sisters and are always got each other's backs and pushing each other forward. And that line when she says, "Make them mind your weather, girl," and she says, "And make them weather your mind." Is it cheesy? Yes. Is it awesome? Yes. Do it in the movies. Don't do it and then have them wink at the camera and be like, "We're so cringe." No. If a character can sell something, if an actor can sell something and make you pump your fist in the air and say like, "Yes, this is why movies aren't good anymore." And I know I sound old on here sometimes, but there's a sense of that we're always doing everything sarcastically, ironically, or satirically. Whereas there were certain movies in the 80s that were just, or 80s and 90s that were just earnest. I feel this emotion earnestly, like the Never-Ending Story. Like that kid goes through every emotion that the character does in this fantastical world. When there's a triumph, he cheers, and when a tragedy happens, he cries with them. Now we don't have that anymore, and that's an allegory for our real world too. That we're always just kind of rolling our eyes at the screen because the characters and the writer don't believe in what they're writing. This does. This believes in it. Bo DeMeo believed in this vision of saying, let's bring the X-Men back and let's do, he has said this, my intention was to make the best piece of X-Men media ever. Guess what, Bo?
I think he succeeded.
You did it.
Or at least up there with Claremont.
Yeah, I mean Claremont's run is so vast that like there's some good and bad in there, whereas this is a little snippet. Like I put this as like, if you want to say this is as long as like a trilogy of movies or whatever, better than any X-Men trilogy of movies that's been put out, and is truer to the characters than anything we've gotten.
And we also got that black leather line.
Yes, yeah. I love that. It gets back at like Bryan Singer from all those years ago saying like, don't make fun of the comic books. Yes, do they look that way? They look that way for a reason, and it pays homage to 100 years legacy of writing these stories and having them be a bit camp. Yes, but if I wear almost all black all the time, but if everybody did that, I'd probably do something else. Yes. So they go up and fight Magneto on Asteroid M, and it does not go well for them because they were going up there to reason with him, and he had just gone through his second Holocaust. Now, you find me somebody who's gone through 2 Holocausts that has the abilities of Magneto, and show me them not losing their shit.
Yeah, but to be fair, it probably could have went better for the X-Men, but Scott kind of screwed the pooch there at the end.
By stopping the professor from going full on. Well, and if he did, and he turned the power back on then, they were still kind of losing that fight down there. He had to, it was the emotional decision that might not have been the best strategic decision. They have retconned in that Magneto's helmet is the same as in the movies and the comic books now, whereas it wasn't originally in the comics. Now, it's okay. I think this is okay, is they don't explain it, but we'll just say at some point during the run from 92 to 97, he did something to his helmet that blocks psychic attack. As in that infamous scene in like the 3rd episode ever, 4th episode, where the professor is fighting Magneto in that chemical plant, he like forces him to relive the Holocaust, the original Holocaust, but he's wearing his helmet. This is before the first time the helmet was actually ever seen as a psychic defense is in the 2000 X-Men movie. They just, Ian McKellen asked, like, why does he wear a helmet? Because I don't think he wanted to wear the helmet. And Bryan Singer was like, oh, it protects him against Professor X. And he was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. No, it doesn't. None of this makes any sense. Just go with it.
I mean, just bringing in some juggernauts.
Yeah, that's the same there. So he does the thing that I've been waiting, and I know that other people have done something similar, but I don't know that Magneto's ever taken off his helmet and put it on the Professor. I don't. If that has happened, I want to see the clip. The image from the comic, it would have been in the comics. Please put that, like, screenshot it, send it to us, private messages, whatever. I want to see it because I've never read that issue. So they finally do the most obvious thing, that if the helmet is designed to insulate, it would also capture.
Yeah.
And kind of chokehold the Professor there. So he puts it on him, and then he fatal attractions Wolverine. After Wolverine, like, claws him through the side. It's very clearly shown. This isn't like what do you call it in it was in Ahsoka when Sabine gets and then also the woman in the other one, the Obi-Wan Kenobi, where she gets stabbed with a lightsaber. People are comparing, like, Qui-Gon and Maul and I cannot remember her name, the sister, the Inquisitor woman, the black lady. In Obi-Wan Kenobi's story, where she gets stabbed, and then the other Inquisitor with the big white bulbous head, I can't remember his name either, he gets stabbed in one of his two stomachs, and then Sabine, I think, gets stabbed, like, more prominently on the side. And that's the thing, is they were very clear, but this was graphic, as graphic as an American cartoon could be, like, with all the gurgling sounds, like intentional ASRM, ASRME.
Not to mention,
it's one of those.
The blood.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. Like, they didn't hold back at all. And then Magneto says this feud is done and rips out the adamantium off of him, which I always thought, in hindsight, a mistake. You've just taken the one person that you could control better than any other person, being coated in metal that you can manipulate, and took away your one ace there. You just fling him into space. You're already in space. Just put him outside.
Or instead of pulling the metal off his skeleton, why not just pull his whole skeleton out?
Ooh. Yeah. Or pull the metal out of him, form a bubble around him, then
encase him back,
let it harden. That's it. Or make just a Wolverine, just bring it to the surface of his skin, completely encasing him in that. Wolverine sculpture statue, put him in some ridiculous pose and leave him there, and then he'll be constantly, which I think at some point they did do something like that in the comics with one of the deaths of Wolverine, and then I guess he could just be constantly healing inside, hanging on to dear life. I mean, poke him a little air hole in there, see how long he can live with no food or water.
Yeah, so Marvel, if you need new writers, we're available.
Yeah. So intense. I was like, and I saw a lot of commentators saying they don't see Magneto coming back from this. They're going to have to go hard. Obviously, a lot of people thought where they're going to go is Onslaught territory. I was surprised that they didn't, but I feel like it's still on the table, because from the event that Fatal Attractions, when that happened, I think it was maybe 2 years later that they did Onslaught.
Yeah.
So they've set it up for whenever they do want to do it. I think they will do it at some point. How big a threat that's going to be? Are they going to do like what they did with the Goblin Queen and have it be one episode, or are they going to have it be a whole season-long thing with a lot of crossovers from what they've set up from all the other 90s characters?
So I'm trying to remember, did Onslaught set up Age of Apocalypse? Or did that come after? Can't remember the order of things.
I'm having a difficult time with it too. And
because
I'm trying to remember it.
I've only read bits and pieces of the comic books and not in order.
I almost think Age of Apocalypse came before it, but that also doesn't seem right to me. Disconnected, at least, because it was Legion who went back in time to specifically kill Magneto so that, his dad's dream could become a reality. And he became convinced that Magneto was the reason that the professor kept getting thwarted or whatever. So he goes back to kill Magneto for some reason, when he was still just kind of a non-entity, non-threat, and when him and Magneto and the professor were still good friends, accidentally kills his own dad instead, inadvertently creating a timeline unto itself. So with Onslaught, it was with all of Magneto's rage and hatred toward mankind and the things that people do with their power, with their authoritarianism, and the professor's hidden frustrations about this toward him and mankind, created this secondary being, or tertiary being, Onslaught. I love this finale. It starts off, I almost wanted to mention something. I almost wanted to do predictions, which we can do that for the second season when it's in the editing phase now. So I don't know when that is slated to be out. They haven't released a date yet, but I think they want to get it out as soon as
I know they just said you got to be patient with this. This is the only thing official they've said about it.
Yeah. So the one thing I was going to predict is do a whole episode, or at least a good chunk, that's a flashback that shows the professor and Magneto when they first met, or not when they first met, but at least when they were first friends at some point. Maybe even throw Gabrielle Haller in there to set up Legion for later, no matter how they want to use that. I think they should definitely do something with Legion, as long as it uses the best bits and not ridiculous points in that character's development. But they didn't do that, but they did a version of it where they're in Magneto's mind and they're in their past and at that specific point. So I thought that was a really good decision. Not doing exactly what I wanted, but close enough. And this shows representation is important, yes, but I think representation of different types of relationships are important too. And a non-toxic platonic relationship between two men, to the point, not like, when I say platonic relationship, I mean not familial, just two guys that meet each other that treat each other like brothers. Something like that can go beyond any kind of romance, any kind of family. It can be a one-of-a-kind, once-in-a-lifetime sort of relationship. And I think that's important that is represented as well as showing homosexual relationships of any variety. And I know there's a lot of different ways that can go, with non-binary people, with trans people, with even to the point some people might say polyamorous relationships should be represented in some degree, to all the way down to your basic regular ass platonic relationship that's non-toxic. Because there's a lot that you could make the argument for that, like, well, we have that, but it's bad.
Yeah.
Like Seinfeld and Friends. All those people are terrible people. They seem to hate each other. The only thing they have in common, and reason that they're all friends and get together all the time, is that nobody else will deal with them. And they're bullshit. And they're always pranking each other in like the worst ways. And they seem to hate everything, including and up to themselves. But this isn't the case. These are two people who are steeped in responsibility. They were given great power, and they knew they had to do great things with them. And it just so happens that they are a race, a stage of evolution that transcends religion, culture, creed, race, sexuality. It would include any and all of those people. And you could be any variety of any of those things and be a mutant and be ostracized within your own micro community. And you would be the newest second-class citizen in the entire world wherever you go. And so that's why the X-Men and Stan Lee's creation of mutants is the best allegory for anybody who feels secondary. And also including autistic individuals, people on the spectrum. I want to make sure and include that as well, because it wouldn't be an episode with me where I don't mention that.
I think it's also great because it points out how that you could have two greatly like opposed ideologies, but still be the best of friends.
Yes, and that's what they keep saying. Is like he actually comes to the point where Magneto says we had a dream, and they were both working toward the same goal but through different means. And the inception of the dream, I don't think Magneto, Max Eisenhardt came out of the Holocaust thinking one day I'll do that. That's not his intent, nor has he ever been shown to want to carry out a Holocaust. I know I'm going to get comments in the comment section if I finish that sentence. Yes, in the comics, there has been extreme times he's been shown to do some pretty extreme things, especially in the Ultimates. I'm not looking at the Ultimates line of comic books.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
That's its own little nutshell.
Yeah, so in the regular 616, yes, I'm talking about the comic books line of storytelling, Magneto's been written better and better over the years. I'll just leave it at that. In this, maybe best of all, because to say we had a dream that mutants could at least, the professor's thing is just coexistence. Magneto's thing is we should at least just be recognized for what we are, that we'll have our own culture, we'll have our own fashion, our own dance, our own art, and it will have our own cities where we'll be predominantly featured in there. Which, there's like some cities that are looked at as predominantly gay in America or predominantly black. And it's not that they've been subjugated or segregated, but it's just that that's where they've congregated for safety, for safe places. There are some places where it's also the opposite, and for a reason. There's some cities that are recognized as being more racist than others or more bigoted than others. Don't go there. Especially if it's cloudy outside or if it starts to get dark, hit them city limits. So the professor keeps saying, like, they keep acting like, okay, good, they're both okay. Like the professor gets stuck in Magneto's mind and he takes control of him, turns back on the power. Okay, so that's good. But then they still have to fight Bastion, who's taken off Cable's arm and is infused it to himself. And he also has time travel technology, because that's where his time travel cube or whatever the that is encased.
Oh, I was wondering how that came into an effect.
Yeah,
I totally forgot about that.
So he has that. And so Cable's kind of stuck here. I mean, I'm sure Forge could build him a new arm, or maybe he'll grow it. I don't know how that techno-organic virus works. So Sebastian has that time travel technology infused into him. Goes up to fight the X-Men on Asteroid M, and just when the president is like, let's also blow up Asteroid M, I wonder what manner of terrible thing could happen if we don't, or if we do. And Captain America's like, we should think about this, but my hands are tied.
Another thing too, like you got all these resources that you could pull of how we're going to deal with Magneto. Let's just launch a bunch of nukes at him, like your plan, because I can't foresee any reason that would go wrong.
And I don't even think that they're nukes. I think they're like more strategic, like surgical style,
like ballistics missiles.
Yeah, because it doesn't. They're like small controlled explosions, because they go after like the gravity core, which is going to turn that into what they did in Age of Ultron, where the Sokovia is gonna like wipe out it's gonna just dinosaur the planet. So then they have, the whole episode is like this huge fight, and yet again, this is something I love they've done it in Doctor Who, they've done it in several forms of media, where you just stop and you use your words, and it might seem cliched or dumb, but I don't think that's when it's done just right, you can still have some great action and win a fight with your mind, which is, I think, at the core what it's about, because who's the X-Men's leader? His most powerful attribute is his mind. And even Magneto is such a brilliant strategist that's oftentimes listed as one of his abilities, depending on where you look. So Cyclops just reasons with him and tells him, like, your mom lied to you. The professor came to look for you. She denied him. And that's okay, because parents mess things up. My dad screwed me up because he became a space pirate and left me behind. But look how I turned out. I'm pretty awesome. And I screwed up my son. Now he's built like a tank. He has a robot arm, or he did the last time I saw him. I don't know how that's going. And so we're going to try and reconcile if I make it out of this alive. And you know what? let's let bygones be bygones. How about you come with us? 'Cause the professor's pretty good at, you know, I don't know, something. And you can come back to the mansion. Actually, you could rebuild it too, since you're responsible for tearing it up. And then they get blown up, and the asteroid's gonna fall into the Earth, and they have to save that too, because they have to do everything. And the Prime Sentinels come back online to fight every superhero in the Marvel Universe. Not just targeting mutants anymore. Hey, guess what? Magneto was right. So, just then the professor brings him out. And also there's a little cameo of Lorna Dane, Polaris, on the, like off in the distance in Magneto's mind. I thought that was a nice addition. A lot of writers always avoid his daughter that died before Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, when he kind of first took on the mantle of Magneto that Chris Claremont wrote. It was his wife went away and she was already pregnant, but he had a daughter named Anya. Nobody's ever done a storyline with her, bringing her back. Sometimes I think that's a good thing, but I also think they should at least reference that. I think that would have been a good moment to do that, but if she doesn't exist in this universe, that's also fine, because they included Lorna Dane, a character I really like that is powers similar to Magneto. Actually, they might just be the exact same. She just uses
not as
them.
developed.
Yeah, she just kind of uses them differently most of the time, so it's pretty cool, and I like a lot of her looks, her costuming. So they all seem really color-coded. It's like red and purple, green and dark green, blue and white, red and red, or red and pink. So the professor gets through to him. He has like a little bit of amnesia, but kind of snaps out of it in his own mind, and he goes through this moment where he is starting to remember who he is, but he can't remember his parents or what they look like, and he has this realization about that. And the professor knows they can't win this without him, but there's also a huge part of him that's also just saying, like, we don't abandon each other. Referencing that season 1 finale when they had to take on Master Mold the first time, and Magneto came out of nowhere to save the X-Men and save the professor specifically, because the professor was going to do a suicide run on Master Mold. And yeah, I was so pleased with the depiction of everybody in this, and the X-Men work as a team and save the day, although they were also kind of losing until Magneto comes in and has to save them, and then they get time displaced like that.
Yeah, I think that time displacement cliffhanger at the end really sets up my theories about where it's going with Apocalypse.
Yeah, showing Apocalypse from like 3 different eras, like on Genosha holding the Queen of Hearts, I think, probably the last card Gambit was holding, and saying so much death. His next death, showing the X-Men in like 3000 BC, and when they're like with in Egypt.
Yeah, like when he first came to power.
Yeah, which also, who is he fighting with? Because he was actually not fighting a losing battle, but he was fighting with a bunch of people. Those could have been Kang's people. Because this is a storyline I think they did with the Avengers, where the Avengers go back into that timeline, or not timeline, but just that period, and fight Kang in ancient Egypt. So we also don't see Wolverine and Morph and Storm. I don't think. They're not shown. There's Beast, Professor X, Rogue, Magneto, and I can't remember who else was there. That's in Egypt. Then in the far-flung future,
Cyclops and
Jean, who will have to assume new identities and raise Nathan for a bit and tell him the stories of the X-Men that will then go on to piss him off, I guess. It's kind of weird. Or will they rewrite that?
Might be rewritten, because the reason it pissed him off is because he wasn't part of that team.
Yeah.
But now he's with his parents again, so.
Yeah, maybe they'll have a moment to actually change that and tell him those stories, but also tell him you were with us in our hearts. And yeah, present day, just Forge and Bishop against Apocalypse, I guess. They might not be doing so well. There's that huge chart, though.
That might set up, because wasn't there like a timeline where it was like an apocalypse thing, and like Wolverine and Storm were kind of like leading the resistance and dating?
Yeah, it was, well, Magneto, I think, was their leader, but they were 2 of the main people in there, and then that's who Bishop finds and takes back in time to help him save the professor. That's as close as they got to doing Age of Apocalypse in real time in the cartoon. cartoon, because I think that was like at the same time as they were doing it in the comic. Maybe one of the newest storylines that they adapted.
Yeah.
Which there's probably some other stuff too, like Omega Red was pretty new when they did him.
Because I think Wolverine and the X-Men, they're actually setting up Age of Apocalypse.
Yeah, I vaguely remember seeing that. Did Professor X travel into the future at some point in that? I haven't seen that.
I don't remember. I've only watched it the one time during its original run. So I was like so stoked because you get to see like Cyclops with Sinister and Apocalypse from that timeline, and then it just goes to credits and that's it.
Yeah. So clearly that season 2 is going to be all about Apocalypse, which I've always been kind of he just seems too powerful, and you have to get really creative with the ways that you defeat him or whatever. So, which is fine. I also just prefer his look in the comics. That he's like blue and like grayish or darker blue, whereas in the cartoon he's
looks like some
and
weird
purple.
frog.
Yeah, and those dim lips. What's up with dim lips?
Well, yeah, his name is Apocalypse.
It is.
Yes, gotta have the lips.
It's the those lips will bring about the end of the world for sure. So I am super excited to see that. And I'm wondering if, like Wolverine's just still on the gurney and Morph's just tending to him, and or if they're in a different timeline. If
Maybe.
or if they're in the future. I don't know. I think that was left that way very specifically because Magneto was still like, there wasn't a whole lot of time that had gone by. He was still kind of seen clutching his wound, but yeah, so they set up some pretty complicated stuff. It might even be cool if there was some weird thing where they weaponize Onslaught or do like a completely new thing with that and have like Apocalypse versus Onslaught and they kind of aim it like they would the Hulk. I don't know, just spitballing here. And of course, present day, there's going to be, they're going to have Gambit back, which a lot of people, as much as they hated to see him go, wanted to have it be a firm death to not cheapen deaths in media at all, but much less comic book media. But this was something they did in the comic books to set it up. So
I think in this situation, though, it's a little less cheapened than just like, oh, he was dead. Oh, now he's back.
Yeah.
It's more like
you will have to earn it.
Yeah.
And then just like with Archangel, for a long time, even if they become a good guy again, it's going to be damaged goods. You know, it's going to be a longer story and a more interesting one than just killing off characters. So I'm okay with that, and that's something. He looks so cool. I hope they don't do all the bondage gear, like simplify it down a little bit, but make him cool. I hope. Yeah,
it's like he died like a badass. Let him come back like a badass.
Yeah, it's gonna be. I'm really looking forward to that, and I wonder if there's gonna be any other notable deaths from there that he gets and brings back as the other Horseman. I hadn't thought about that. No. That could actually be new, and because like they killed Banshee right on there, like right on screen, and Leech and whatever that pastel woman's name is, I forget. She's like,
I keep wanting to say Spiral. That's not Spiral.
Yeah, it's the one with 6 arms. I can't remember. She can like turn herself 2-dimensional. That's her power. But I cannot. I cannot remember. I'm not going to remember her name. No. You could tell me her name, and I'd be like,
because I keep going through like all these people. I'm like, no, it's not her. So I'm like, oh, Vertigo. I'm like, no, that was one of Sinister's
Yeah, I keep wanting to say Vertigo too, because that's that person. I feel like I associate them together.
Yeah, I'm like, no, that's one of Sinister's
because they
lackeys.
Do look similar.
Yeah.
Anyway, wow, did we record enough for 2 parts?
Probably. I'm going to release it as one.
Okay.
But yeah, if you've made it with us this far and you've not watched the first season of X-Men 97, 1, why? Go watch it.
Yeah, clearly you can tell how much we love it.
Yeah. Again, we've watched it twice. Probably going to watch it a 3rd time before the next season comes out.
Certain episodes I've watched at least 3 times.
But if you made it with us this far, thank you. Let us know what you thought of the X-Men 97 first season. Follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. We'll have links in the description below. And until next time, see you.